Greetings. All right, so happy Boxing Day and all that. I spent about an hour putting this board together today, and I'm going to do one on the East as well. Trade season is upon us. Trade deadline's on March the 8th. There's starting to become a lot of discussion of who is or isn't available, and this is where the rubber meets the road. We saw trade deadline start early last year, where Bo Horvat got dealt to the Islanders. Do not be surprised if we see an early trade deadline start again this year. It started just before I headed down to California last year, and we're going to California again this year. So it may very well be that I could be at Disneyland doing like little videos here and there with, hey, so this guy signed an extension after being traded. So which guy on the board is it going to be? We'll see. So we'll start with the Ducks. So I've got this from Ducks through Arizona. I've mixed up the teams a bit. The Ducks have a few interesting decisions to make at the deadline. Adam Henrique, I think, would attract some interest at the deadline. Silverberg might. Silverberg's problem is he has not had a very good year, and the cap hit is high, so you're going to need a broker if you're going to move him. Carrick would have definitely attract some interest at the deadline. Labushkin, teams are always looking for depth on the blue line at the deadline, so all four of them could attract interest. Their RFA list, you have Jones, Leeson, Lacombe, Lundestrom, and Vakanainen. And of course, Lundstrom's been out all year with an injury. And Lacombe's been an interesting rookie defenseman. I didn't talk about him yesterday in the rookies videos, but he has been interesting to watch. His overall numbers have been a little rough, but he's a young defenseman. So what I always point out, young defensemen make mistakes. Cap space, $13,029,377. So they absolutely could park a bad contract here, and teams are probably going to be looking for somebody to acquire a bad contract so they can acquire somebody else that they'll regret later. 12 points out of the playoffs for the Anaheim Ducks. Anaheim has been, good and then bad and then kind of in the middle lately. I think the reality is they're probably better than their record, but 12 points out of the playoffs, they'll be sellers at the deadline. The Winnipeg Jets should be buyers. Now, what's interesting is their UFA list is Dillon, DeMello, Brossoit. I always love when it's Dillon and DeMello next to each other since DeMello's first name is Dillon. So when they're paired together, great, perfect, awesome. Their RFA list is interesting too. You got Heinola, Stanley, Perfetti, and Gustafson. Perfetti's going to get paid. He's absolutely going to get paid. I do wonder if Stanley and Heinola will be members of the Jets next year. They've both had a hard time, cracking the lineup and staying there. Heinola, of course, this year sadly has been injured as well. So I would not be surprised to see one or the other, or maybe both, on a different team come next season. But for DeMello, for Dillon, they should both be sticking with Winnipeg. I'd be very surprised if they don't sign extensions. Brossoit, we'll see. The goalie carousel is usually a thing. It may be a thing again next summer. I wouldn't be surprised. For Calgary, there's a lot of decisions to be made here. You've got Lindholm, you've got Greer, you've got Hanifin, Tanev, Osterley, DeSimone, Gilbert, Shillington, all UFAs this coming summer. Tanev and Hanifin, right? Teams drool over getting a top four defenseman at the deadline. Hanifin's been good. I think Tanev's play has honestly dropped off a bit this year. Normally he's a defensive stalwart, but there's been some shaky moments for him this season. That being said, I don't think it's going to affect his value at the deadline. Lindholm is a very good second line center option. And so for teams that are looking for a second line center, Colorado comes to mind, Boston comes to mind. The market will be there. Calgary's only 3 points out of the playoffs, but are they gonna go all in? No. And so if they're not going to negotiate extensions with Lindholm and Hanifin between now and the deadline, they should trade them. You don't want to lose them for nothing. Their RFA list, Pelche and Dubé. Of course, Pelche was supposed to be a good rookie for the Flames this year, and he's been injured. Sadly, considering what Zary and Pospisil have been able to do for Calgary, it'd be amazing if Pelche was out there too. But anyways, such is life in hockey. Cap space, $4,439,167. So the cap space, again, it's current. This is right now. Keeping in mind there's injuries, there's LTIR, all this other fun stuff to track. So that's why I just go to Cap Friendly and go, this is what they're saying the cap space is right now. Vegas, they have some UFA decisions to make between now and the end of the year. Marchessault, I can't see them letting Marchessault go. Stevenson, it will be interesting to see how much Stevenson gets paid. He's been on a very team-friendly contract. Carrier, good support, third-line player. Amadio, same. Martinez, shot-blocking king of the NHL, but he's on the older side, so do you just let him go or do you bring him back for another year? I would think if the Vegas Golden Knights decide to keep all 5, they'll find a way to make it work, and the players will find a way to work with them to make it work because they won the cup last year, and that's the way it works. When players feel like they have a chance to win, they will usually give a team a bit of a break on the cost. RFAs, Dorofeev, Patera, Korczak. Korczak's the one to keep an eye on because he's had a good rookie season. How much is that worth and for how long? Do you go for a 2-year deal? Do you go for 4? Cap space, $4,487,516 currently. They're second in the Pacific, 2 points back of the Vancouver Canucks. Colorado, some UFAs here too. Nobody earth-shattering, but Drouin does kind of stand out. He's had a good, not great year with Colorado, so if he wants to stick around, odds are the cap hit probably comes down a bit. Cogliano is there too. Kivi Ranta. Francouz, of course, who won't play for the rest of this season, so his NHL career may very well be at an end. Olofsson, McDermott, Jack Johnson, and Caleb Jones. And then the RFA is Prosvetov. So I don't have everybody on the list for the UFAs and the RFAs because then it just gets kind of ridiculous. But Prosvetov, it will be interesting to see how much he's worth, whether or not they sign him to an extension, what happens there. Their cap space currently, $5,600,000. They are second in the Central, although they're tied with Dallas for first. Which brings us to the St. Louis Blues. Their UFA list, Kapanen. I think Kapanen would attract some interest at the deadline. Blais, Sundqvist would as well, based on his defensive numbers. Scandella and Vrana. Does Vrana attract any interest? We shall see. RFA list, Perunovic and Alexandrov. Perunovic, not bad, but again, neither of them would get like huge raises, I would think, this summer. The cap space for the Blues, $2,706,440. They are 1 point out of the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see what they do if they're still only 1 point out of the playoffs. If you have these expiring contracts, do you move one? St. Louis has not been shy in the past about selling off UFAs to be without selling off the team. So basically, you sell off guys on expiring contracts you're not going to keep, and then you bring in other guys to backfill there. St. Louis has been willing to do that. The Oilers will be interesting to watch. Warren Foegele is an upcoming UFA. Foegele is a very hard-working forward, very popular forward. I'm kind of surprised they haven't worked out an extension with him yet. Janmark, Brown, Ernie, Gagne, Desharnais, and Pickard, all in that UFA list. And Desharnais kind of stands out a little bit as a player that I think is important to Edmonton, but is he going to be expensive to Edmonton? Nah, it won't be expensive. But of those players, I think Desharnais is the one they'll be most keen to hold on to, although Janmark's been good recently. RFA list, Holloway, who right now is injured, and of course, the development for Holloway, not quite where I think the Oilers would have wanted it to be before the injury. But we'll see if he comes back. Hamblin's been good, but again, is that worth a huge raise? Probably not. Cap space, $238,333. Even with all the injury help these teams are getting to be under the cap, the Oilers are right at it, and they're 5 points out of the playoffs. So the Oilers will have some interesting decisions to make at the deadline. If they're still 5 points out of the playoffs, and I don't think they will be, I think they're going to get above the playoff line. But yeah, they do have some UFAs that would have value if they decided to sell at the deadline, especially Foegele. I think there'd be a lineup for Foegele. San Jose, you've got some decisions to make if you're the Sharks. LeBanc, who has not had a great year. Hoffman has been better lately. I would say the last 15-20 games have been better than the 15-20 games that preceded it. Duclair, he's been solid lately too. Bailey's been very good for San Jose. I'd honestly be kind of surprised if San Jose doesn't just keep him. Barabanov has not had a fantastic year for them thus far. McDonald's been good. McDonald can play on the blue line or up front. Kakinen has had a better run recently than he had to start the season. He might make an interesting decision at the deadline about renting. Carpenter, Lindblom, and Schimmick on the list too. And I don't know that there's any market there for those three players, but figured I'd put them up there. RFA list, Emberson, who they picked up on waivers. I would think, they'll probably get him extended. Addison, important they keep Addison, I think. He's been good for them. Thrun, Ohotchik, Cunnin, Zadina, and Studnicka. None of these players would break the bank for the San Jose Sharks, a team which has only $3,253,053 in cap space. I'm as surprised as anybody else that their cap space isn't higher. They're 15 points out of the playoffs currently, so yeah, for San Jose, it'll be very fascinating to see who they move and what they get for those players when they do, because they're definitely going to be a seller. Nashville, their UFA list is as follows. You got Trennan, Novak, McCarron, Sherwood, Cole Smith, Tyson Berry, Carrier, Lankinen. Keep in mind, they're a wild card team. So this is a team we would have looked at before the season started and said, all right, so who are they going to sell and how much they're going to get for them? At this point, I think it's like Novak you want to hold on to, Trennan you want to hold on to. I think they prefer to hold on to Cole Smith. McCarron, probably about 50-50, although McCarron's been good energy player, and he's had a couple of goals here and there. Sherwood's been good, too. Barry, he wanted out and then, kind of recanted a little bit. It feels like that relationship's been fixed. But I think if the opportunity came up for him to go somewhere else at the deadline, I don't think he'd oppose it. That may very well have been what he was told. Just, yeah, we'll probably move you at the deadline. Just don't make your value go down. RFA, so basically put in a position where teams know, well, they have to trade him, so we're going to offer you less. RFAs, you got Fabro. Fabro has not become the player that I think he was expected to be when he was first drafted, but I mean, as a top 6 defenseman, we'll see what he's worth and if they keep him around for, a 2-year deal or what they do there. Parsonen's been good. Tomasino's a good forward too. But this is a team with cap space, so there's not really anything to worry about there. $13,772,259. So I think they have enough money to keep everybody around should they choose to. And as a number 1 wild card, who are only 5 points behind the Jets, and the Jets have been playing very, very well, I think there will be some temptation in Nashville to add at the deadline, and why not go for it? If you can add a Lindholm to this team right now, go for it, right? So Nashville might very well be a dark horse to pick up a player once we get closer to trade deadline. Minnesota, their UFA list as follows: Duhaime, Maroon, Goligoski, Bogosian, Mermis, Fleury. Nothing there that you get overly concerned with, and I would think that Fleury, this is probably his last year in the NHL, right? And so next year, you've got Wallstead coming up, and yeah, we'll see how all that goes, but I don't see any reason why they can't re-sign players they want to keep. Their RFA list is just doer. So really, honestly, this is not a team that should have a whole lot of trouble holding things together. Their cap space currently $5,278,333. They are 2 points out of a playoff spot. So Minnesota's going to be a key one to watch at the deadline. Maybe they'll be one too that do like a soft sell at the deadline, move guys you're not going to keep, bring other guys in to backfill. It'll be interesting to see what they do. LA's a contender right now, but that is a really interesting 3-way race in the Pacific Division. They're currently third. They're 5 points behind Vegas, but they have games in hand on the teams they're chasing. Their UFA list is as follows: Lewis, Roy, Talbot. Talbot, I think, has earned himself a pretty good contract next time out. And how much is that worth? And do you pay him based on this year's stats, or do you pay him on what you think he's going to do and how much longer he's going to be around and how much is Talbot going to get? So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Riddick is also on the UFA list. His contract up this year. Arvidsson, who is on LTIR currently, and Copley is on LTIR as well. Their RFA list: Spence, who's been very good, Lizotte, Grunstrom, Byfield, Kaliev, Anderson, Dolan. Byfield really stands out. He has had quite the breakthrough season, and if you're LA, you want to sign him long term. You would want to, I would think 6 years. I would think at least 5-6 years for Byfield based on how this season's gone. You don't want to give him just a bridge deal for 2 years and then have to pay through the nose 2 years down the road, which is, I think, what would happen there. So it'll be interesting to see which direction they go when it comes to Quentin Byfield and how much money he makes. Their cap space currently $3,268,333. And as I said, they're third in the Pacific. They're 5 points back of Vegas, but they have games in hand on those teams ahead of them. Seattle Kraken, the underachievement so far has been worthy of note. Eberle's a UFA next summer. How much is that worth? Wenberg. Tatar, who has improved his value in Seattle already, I think. Shore, Schultz, Drieger. So Drieger's contract comes up this summer. And Belmar. Belmar is out for a while now with an injury, but useful bottom 6, fourth line forward when he's in there. And RFAs, the two of note here, Tolvanen and Beniers. Beniers is going to get paid. I think Beniers, even though his second season hasn't been fantastic, I think they'll go with like an 8-year deal. Think in terms of like what Nico Hischier got, and I think it'll be a similar overall number for Beniers. And I know it sounds like, well, that's a bit high for what Beniers is doing now. A lot of young players will sign contracts that are really expensive at the time, and then they grow into them. So Draisaitl comes to mind. Keller comes to mind as well in Arizona. It's the way the economics with hockey works now. Cap space $4,834,166. They are 3 points out of the playoffs. One thing to keep in mind with Seattle, they have played more games than the teams they're chasing, so that makes it more difficult. But as I've said before, the games in hand only matter if you win them, and sometimes teams don't. Dallas, UFA list, Duchesne, who's been excellent lately. Craig Smith, Hakanpää, Wedgwood, and Pavelski. So maybe Duchesne and Pavelski can just be the guys who sign 1-year extensions every year for Dallas. Pavelski's done that the last couple of years, and maybe this is where we'll start seeing Duchesne do it. Either way, they've both been very good for Dallas. Their RFA list, Steele, Dellandrea, Lundqvist, and Harley. Lundqvist has not produced to the point he hasn't really been prominent enough either to justify that first-round pick. They traded for him. But Harley's been excellent on the blue line for Dallas this year. I think he's earned himself I would say 4 or 5 year extension, but in this year's NHL, everybody's 8 years. Just kind of 8 years and maybe argue them down to 6, right? But yeah, they will be fascinating to watch at the deadline. Of course, Wedgwood on an expiring contract, so is Matt Murray going to be the backup next year? Will they hold on to Wedgwood? That'll be interesting to watch. But they're first in the Central, tied with Colorado. Vancouver has some decisions to make at the deadline and has some decisions to make between now and July the 1st. Bluger is on an expiring contract, and so are Lafferty, Joshua, DeSmith, Myers, Zadorov, Cole, and Friedman. Now, this is a team that is trying to get out from under some bad contracts, and at the very least, Myers' contract expires this summer. The RFA list, Pettersson, Hronek, and Podkolzin. Every article about Pettersson, how much is Pettersson going to get? Pettersson, don't forget Pettersson. What about Hronek? Like, seriously, between Hronek and Pettersson, they could cost the team $20 million in cap. Like, this is where we're at. Like, I could say that with the way Pettersson's played this year, he could get 11, 12 million a year. Sure, I believe that. Which means that Hronek, is it outside of the realm of possibility? Hronek, who's almost a point per game, could argue, well, I'm worth $8 million a year, and use examples around the NHL to justify it. So while the Pettersson situation is fascinating and all, I don't think people have paid as much attention to Hronek as they should, because he's been kind of a revelation for the team to this point in the year, and it's going to be very expensive. And I think that's part of the reason why he was available from Detroit. And then Podkolzin, who's been in the AHL this year. Do they hold on to them? Does he sign in the KHL and they just retain his rates in the NHL? Like, what happens between now and the end of the season? Because if he doesn't end up coming up and playing for Vancouver, I wouldn't blame him for saying I can play overseas and get good money and play more and have a chance to play at that top level over there. So we'll see what happens. Their cap space currently $3,691,250. They are first in the Pacific, 2 points ahead of the Vegas Golden Knights, and I'm as surprised as anybody with that. But hey, it's been great. And again, they're going to have to find a way to hold on to Hronek and Pettersson. And as I've mentioned before too, the good news is with the record the Canucks currently have, you can sell both Peterson and Hronek on the idea of, okay, we're doing something special here. If you guys sign for a little less money than you'd get on the market, if you guys, or you'd get through an offer sheet, yada, 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 we can use that money that we save on the two of you to go out there and make sure that the team that's on the ice is good enough to compete. So if you guys take maybe $1.5 million less than you'd get on the market, $1.5 million less than what you get offered on an offer sheet, then we can use that combined $3 million to go out there and get players and make sure the rest of the team can compete for a Stanley Cup. Chicago will be fun to watch come the deadline. Tyler Johnson, Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, Beauvillier, who they just acquired from the Canucks. Watch them flip Beauvillier for more than they acquired him for. Blackwell, Zaitsev, Tenorti, Mrazek. Zaitsev, I would think, would have some value at the deadline. I don't think they'll get a ton for him. They might have to go through a third party when it comes to his cap hit, so you have that little money laundering stuff going on. But Tyler Johnson, an interesting one. I think he's played well for Chicago this year. I think there'd be some interest in him at the deadline. And Foligno has been pretty good too. The question then becomes, so is it just the Bedard show after the deadline? Like, do they just trade out the veterans that are on expiring contracts and just Bedard's even more on his own, or do you keep them all? Or do you go out and get new ones, right? Do you trade them off and then just acquire a couple of bad contracts from another team? So their RFA list: Gutman, Reichel, Entwistle, Reese Johnson, Radish, Vlasic, Phillips, Crevier, and Anderson. Vlasic and Crevier are the interesting ones here to me. Both of them have looked very good. Again, they're young defensemen. They're going to make some mistakes along the way, but they both look good. They're towers on that blue line. How much do you give them and for how long? And again, do you go bridge contract or do you say, you know what, we believe in Crevier or we believe in Vlasic, we'll give them 4-year deals at X amount of $1 million, right? But I do think Foligno would make an interesting rental at the deadline, and Dickinson has definitely improved his value this season. Keep in mind that after they get traded, sort of like Domi last year, Domi was putting up really good point totals in Chicago. Wasn't quite the same after he got traded. So for the players producing in Chicago right now, they're going to be getting opportunities they wouldn't get elsewhere. Their cap space, though, $17,131,958. It's a lot of cap space. This is a team that can afford to eat a couple of bad contracts at the deadline. And again, maybe you use that to offset any trades out that you're making so that Bedard has some guys still to play with. Arizona, Zucker, UFA, he just signed the 1-year deal with them. Sanford, O'Brien, Dumba, Brown, Stetcher, Dermott, Boyd, and Voracek and Little's contracts expire. So those are two of the guys they acquired just to, for that getting to the cap floor. That's going to be going away. The Arizona Coyotes will not be acquiring guys who aren't going to play again. Those days are almost done because once Voracek and Little are off the books, there's only, I think, like one left going into next season in terms of players that won't play again that they have under contract. Their RFA list: Dursey. How much is Dursey worth? And with Dursey, it's going to be a matter of, do you go short-term or long-term? I think it's going to be short-term. Valimaki, Kesselring, and Mosier. Mosier is an important defenseman to them. Kesselring has had a really strong run lately. And Valimaki, I think, has played well enough that if they did say, you know what, we don't think there's going to be room for Valimaki next season on the blue line, we'll make him available, I think teams would call. Cap space, $5,663,290. They're the number 2 wild card. They're 2 points behind Nashville, who are the number 1 wild card. So that's one thing to keep in mind with the Coyotes, too. This is not a team that looks like they'll be selling, just straight selling at the deadline. And maybe we'll see some hockey trades. Maybe we'll finally see, I need a defenseman, you need a forward, and trades made that way. I'm really, really hopeful. But yeah, the cap space tells you that these teams right now have some space to make some rooms. But remember, some of this is because there's guys on LTIR, there's injured reserve players moved up, moved down, and all that. And it's far more complicated. But let me know your thoughts. Who do you think stays? Who do you think goes? And who do you think is going to be the really big target of these guys on the board from the Western Conference teams? And why is it Elias Lindholm or Noah Hannafin? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.